Karen the Warp Spinster here. Thank you for joining me today. This is going to be, I think, my last video, at least for a while, about doing some improvisational work on this particular half square triangle set. I've squared up about half of what I have left. I have quite a few left. I did want to show you one more thing that I did, which is pretty straightforward. I don't think it will be at all difficult to understand. Since the last video, I did do a few more blocks or units. I'm not sure this was a new one. I think I might have done that one last time. These two, this one is what I'm going to show you today, and that's just slicing it. Well, I didn't do it in half. No, that's not what I'm doing today. What do I know? That was just, I did slice it in half this direction. All right, I'll get my act together, I promise. I did cut it in half in this direction, inserted a strip, and then I cut it not half in this direction and inserted a wider strip. And that's kind of what I was going to show you today, and I don't think I really need to demo that. That will belabor that point a little too much. So that certainly is an easy thing you can do, is just start cutting in halves and doing fourths. And then I just kept playing around with slicing them at different places, inserting different widths, twisting pieces around. So after I would cut the half square triangle, I'd turn them this way and that, and insert here, insert there. And there is, phew, better. I'm OCD, can you tell? Or CDO, as it should be for us OCDs, alphabetical order, the way it should be, especially for librarian OCDs. So I have more of these. I'm now getting a larger collection. I did want to show you one thing here that I did just to try it out. I think I mentioned earlier about how interesting it might be to have, you could do some embellishment by doing embroidery down these long strips or any of the strips. So I thought, well, let me give that a try. I didn't want any really fancy stuff with beading and all of that I like to do on a lot of crazy quilts. But I thought a little texture might be nice, so I just used a couple of the stitches on my machine to do some texture on it. Just a couple of simple designs that I think is kind of cool. It's very subtle, but it adds a little something to it. And honestly, it adds a little bit of stability to it. It's not quite as squirmy as you can get with a lot of seams and a lot of little pieces. So that was interesting. I don't know if anyone will notice it, but I'm of the camp that thinks the closer you get to a quilt, you should be able to see new things when you get closer to a quilt, so that you're always seeing something different. So here's my stack of units so far, and I want to talk or think a little bit today anyway about how to put these together. And the first thing I want to do is decide on another color to be kind of an accent color, but when I'm piecing them together, they aren't all going to fit perfectly. Even if no matter how many blocks I have, I'm going to have some spaces that just aren't going to fit. Or sometimes I may want to just add in a little strip of an accent there. The thing that I want to avoid when I'm putting these together is doing long linear or horizontal pieces. It's those very linear and horizontal quilts are okay, but when I'm doing something like this, I like it to remain pretty abstract. So I wouldn't want to just keep going with strips down this way, or so that it lines up like this and I'm just sewing strips together. Not for this quilt anyway. So I might end up, maybe I'll put these two together, probably not the same size, but I might put those two together, and then I might want I don't know, one like here and another one down there, so that it breaks it up more, and I don't have so much straight lines for the entire length and width of the quilt. That makes them into blocks, I guess. I'm putting units into blocks and putting the quilt together, which is perfectly acceptable, of course. That's what we do with quilts all the time, but I don't want the block look in this, is what I'm trying to say, and not doing very well at that. So then the question becomes, what am I going to fill these spaces with? And I've been thinking that I want to have another color to accent this. And I think I showed you last time the pretty bright orange that I used with this on the quilt from which these came. But I want to use a different color, and so I went down to my stash of solids and just took this half square triangle and just put it up against a lot of my solids, and some of them were clearly, oh no. And some of them were, you know, maybe. So I brought up some of the maybes. In my heart, I was thinking, oh, wouldn't a lovely lime green or a teal blue be really nice? But the bright ones, the deeper, brighter ones were no. For me, they might be just what someone else is looking for. So I just went through, and I'm kind of honestly thinking I'm going back to kind of an orange again, aren't I? I think this kind of terracotta look with it is pretty good. So that's a definite possibility. The pink is not horrible, but I don't think so. The green, I think, is too much of a contrast for this. I guess I don't want the accent to detract from the piecing that I'm doing. And I'm afraid that those might do it. So I'm kind of thinking that I'm looking at one of these, or maybe both of them. It might be add a little texture and interest if I use, they're just not a lot different, but. So the next thing I would do then would be to, I've been using this for piecing something. In an ideal world, of course, I would press this, but not going to at the moment. And let's just kind of spread them out a little bit with some spaces in between and see what we think of that as a color. I have, I guess, 3, maybe 4 options for what I can do. I can use more of this if I have more of this. I'm not sure that I do. I could use this for the strips. I could use one other color. I could use more than one other color. I don't know how many options we're up to now. I could do multicolor, but I think that's definitely too distracting, so that one's out. Or I can just do white if I want a 2-color quilt. And I might. That's just a half square triangle. I'm not hating this. This is kind of a blush, I guess. What happens if we put down this other color? Just auditioning colors here for what I might like. I don't know what I cut from these that I've used some. So I guess this qualifies as a scrap now too, doesn't it? Since I've cut from it already. I might like that a little better than the other one. Honestly, I'm not entirely sure. I don't just want to use white. What happens if we use both of these? And I wouldn't do them in a block like this. I'd mix them up. But some pieces here. These are not colors I would use ordinarily at all. None of these. Which is one of the cool things about it, because I'm using colors I wouldn't otherwise use. It's good to stretch. I don't know. What do you think? Or maybe you like one of these others as well. Let me know in the comments what your thoughts are. I am undecided. One thing I can do though is to just start putting them together. It's not as if I don't know how to use my seam ripper, if it turns out I hate them. Or just start cutting some strips and putting in between. Maybe I'll do a little bit of that. I'm gonna cut a few strips and then I'll come back to you. You don't have to watch me do this. I have cut strips of varying widths here, some very narrow ones and some wider ones. I might, in fact, when I piece it together, have some larger spaces to fill, but this will give me some idea. Let me set these off to the side a bit and just lay out a couple of pieces here and see. I don't want the same thing right next to each other, so perhaps we put in a narrow strip of that dark one there and a little bit wider strip of the lighter one. And I think maybe a little wider here, piece down there, another one here, but have a wider, darker strip here. And this is just simulating that width. Wouldn't necessarily be that width, but just to get an idea. Now, ideally, you would take a picture of this, and that can really help you. At the moment, my camera is doing the recording here, but my Apple Watch is, you can barely see it here, but it is mirroring what my camera is doing, so I can kind of get a look here. I don't know how I feel about having another color in there. I'll be happy to see what your opinions are about the color. I'm just afraid that it will end up overwhelming all of this, because it's enough of a different color that it will show. I'm going to stand up so I can see it better. I don't know. I think I'm probably going to just have to leave it out for a little bit, walk away, come back, and see how I feel. Of course, these don't all have to be up and down. Have some cross like that. And I don't have to have strips in between. I can put blocks, of course, sew the blocks right together. And I would need to fill a space up there then, but and I can see that this is starting to be strippy, and that's not necessarily what I'm going for. So I might want to, over here, which you can barely see, might want to maybe drop this one down a bit. Have another one over here. It's just going to be a puzzle to put together. I have to stay focused here, Karen. You're just looking at colors for sewing these together. I could I could either use a lot of strips, or I could do things like this where I'm getting those even and then sew something like that, which I think I would like better rather than having a lot of these strips crisscrossing. And what if they are very narrow strips? Barely there strips. I think I would like that better than having big sections or pops of color there. I think that's the route I would go if I decided to do it that way. And you don't have to sit and listen to me. Yeah, oh yeah, narrow is much better. Don't have to sit and listen to me yammer to myself about this. I'm just gonna play with it, with the width of the strips, and see how I feel about it. And it may sit for a while I make some other units. And then when I have more units to put together, I can get a better feel of the proportion of these strips to this darker rust color. I think that's going to be the key, is the proportion. It's not so much the color now, it's how much of it I want to be showing compared to the dark color, the units. And I think I might like the two colors if they're in very narrow strips. That's looking better to me. I'm back with a few blocks that I have made since last you saw me, and truth be told, I have also put together some of the units, but somehow the camera slipped into time-lapse mode, and you don't probably want to watch that. It's not a very good explanation. I will put it at the end of this video, so if you're interested in watching how I put this together, you can see that in time-lapse. I will not be offended if you don't want to watch it. A couple of things that I want to point out about how I'm doing this. One is that on these very, very narrow pieces, I am sometimes trimming this seam because I usually want it to go toward this bit, because toward this insert here, because that sort of lifts it off a little bit and gives some more texture. And sometimes that seam is so narrow that I do a little trimming of the seam that's underneath, so that get rid of this dark thread here, so the other seam will fold over it more easily and cleanly. And that's what I've done here. So I trimmed this seam so that one fits over it nicely. Gives a little bit of padding too. It adds bulk there for sure, but it's not enough for me to worry about for how I'm going to quilt this, I think. So that's one thing. I'm sort of nesting the seams. I'm overlapping them there. The other one is that when you have a light fabric and a dark fabric, and you fold the seam back, then here, for example, that color, if the seam isn't exact, this color is going to shadow through on the edge of this seam. There's enough shadowing here just from having more layers there that you don't want this shadowing through. When it comes to quilting it, that's going to make a difference. So what I do is either come back and fold back the lighter part and trim that darker part, the seam with the darker part in it, just a bit, just enough so that it isn't hanging over or at the edge of that. So that's one thing you can do, is after the fact, after the seam, to go in and trim the one that might shadow through. The other thing I can do is, especially when I'm adding on these white strips, I know that if I press it toward the white strip, I just shift it a little bit so that the white strip is extended a little beyond the other strip, so that when I do the seam, and then I do the seam according to the white strip, I measure from that, which makes this side of the seam just a tiny bit narrower, but it's okay. It's just a tiny bit. It will still hold. It will be fine. And that way I don't have to trim the seam after. But it is good to take precautions ahead of time so that you don't get to the point where you're quilting this and you've got these dark threads or dark edges showing through. All right, so there's another piece to sew. Now, I wanted to talk about and actually do some putting together of these pieces, because I know I showed in the first video how you can sort of figure it out, but then I was kind of vague about it. So I thought I'll just sit down and start putting together sections. I like to do these sort of these improvisational things where anything where I have inconsistent block sizes and various sizes. It's not like I can piece together 3-inch and 6-inch and 9-inch pieces. These are just all over the map because they aren't really measured. They're just squared up where I felt like squaring them up. So when I have blocks like that, so it might be when I'm doing an orphan block quilt and building a quilt from blocks that are left over from other quilts, and I can put those together, and this is generally how I do it. I mentioned that I don't like to have big long strips across it. So for example, I wouldn't want to have these match up and have a long horizontal line going across here, whether that line is blocks that are sewed right to each other or whether there is a strip in between it. It is less noticeable if you're doing blocks, more noticeable if you're bringing a strip into it, but it still is noticeable and acceptable, but it's not how I want to do this quilt. So as I'm building sections, I'm going to build this quilt section by section, and I'm not aiming to have a particular size or dimensions for it. I'm just putting together blocks that I think look good together and adding in strips where I want some or where I need them. Then once I put those sections together, I can start putting the sections together. So I'll take one section and arrange it with another section. Now in this case, for example, if this ended up being a section, then I could have this long one next to it. But I've got this break here, and one of my choices would be to put a strip all the way across here to bring these all in line. Or I could do another section down here and extend this. So it's putting together pieces of the puzzle, but I always start out with doing sections. And they don't need to be the same or similar size to each other. This one may end up being about the same. I seem to have that in my head. But if I were putting this next to it, for example, I might clear these out of here. I might shift it up like this because I don't want to continue this straight line across here, all the way across. So I would expect that section to go up here and probably have another section up here, so that this vertical line breaks up this horizontal line. It's my personal preference. If you like or don't mind having those long vertical and horizontal lines, go for it. This is your quilt. Now, as time goes on, I'm going to continue to work on this off camera. You won't see me working on this for probably until I'm about ready to put all the sections together. But one of the options that I thought might be what I do with this quilt is to have a single column just of these blocks, just in a vertical strip about 1/3 of the way over from the edge. So I'd have lots of negative space on both sides, less on one side than on the other. In that case, I will eventually need to put them together into a long strip, but I'm not entirely convinced that's what I want to do. I want to finish up with the half square triangles to see how many I have, think about what size quilt I want, and if I want that much negative space next to this. I don't know yet. So right now, all I'm focusing on is putting together sections like this one. As you can see, I have decided to do, two colors of strips here. The lighter and the darker melon. I'm trying not to have too much of that. I want to use it sporadically. So for example, when I connected these, I could have put another strip in there, but that would have been too much of the melon, and I don't want it to detract from my main pieces, which are this dark rust color. So I'm just going to start out. I might start with a large piece like this and just start putting blocks that I think would look pretty good together. And I end up here with this large gap. So I can either, of course, I have the choice to chop this off on either side or both sides to open up that gap so I can put in another block. Or I can add strips to the side. This is probably, if I were to sew these two together, for example, try to allow for the seam allowance in there, and I've got a pretty wide strip here. I don't want a melon strip that wide. That would be way too distracting for what I want to do. So if I decide to just fill that in with a strip, I'm going to use white because that blends in better with what I have done for each of these units. Not entirely sure that I want to do that though. So I could make this a section by itself, this longer one, and then build another section like this. These are pretty close, so I could just sew those together, maybe with a melon strip in between, maybe not, and then just trim them so that they're equal in size. I can also, I have not tried this yet, but there's no reason why I can't just take a half square triangle and make a slice about the size of what I need and just use that piece. Now I would have to add something onto that to make it fit there, but that's an option for me too, and I could do it that way or this way or that way. Add probably a white strip over here. Again, that's getting pretty wide for what I want to do with melon, but I think I would put the white strip over here, and then what I want to do up here. I could just, of course, find a different block or unit. I guess I'll start calling these blocks. Or I could make this unit wider. longer, whatever. And sorry, I was just checking to make sure that I'm not in time lapse again. That is a possibility there. And then I would need a block up here to fill in, which could be a longish block like this. Bring that down. Then I would need a strip or to cut that off. And again, the strip could be, this is narrow enough, it could be a melon strip, or I could do a white strip. Over here I have quite a bit of this dark color, so I think I could go ahead and fill in this space here with, well, this could actually be a melon. If I move this over and I could do just a narrow melon strip in there, then add these two in. This will need a white strip over here, and then I'm going to need a strip over here. It's probably going to end up being a pretty wide strip, depending on how wide these strips are. So what I'm trying to do is to not make this all the way across here. I want to break it up so that I don't have seams all the way across. And I'm not here, you can see that seam is going to continue all the way across. So this I might switch out so that that seam does not follow there. So do you see what I'm doing? I'm trying to avoid having this long seam cut across this vertical seam. So I want a vertical strip that's going to break up that line. And I have this piece left over. Of course, I could always sew these two together, even like that, and trim it here then. And there I've got that settled. Now, when I sew these together, and I will be sewing it then to here, I've got a strip here, and it's going to be fairly wide, frankly, because once I put in these seams, that's going to be wider space there. But I can deal with that. I will deal with that once I get there. So then I need to decide, do I want to trim this to make these two equal, or do I want to add a strip? And if I want to add a strip, do I want to add it over here, or do I want to add it there? I think I'm going to put it over here. And I'm trying not to amass a lot of this melon color anywhere. I want it to just be pops of highlights here. And I don't want to have vertical melon strips all the way across. So I don't want to have another one here vertical and then another one here vertical. I want to break it up and alternate it. So I might do just a narrow vertical strip here. And that might actually, then once that goes together, this may make this even longer. So I could do a vertical strip here. Let's just start putting these together and you can see what I'm talking about. I'm going to keep the camera on to make sure that I don't slip it into time lapse, or maybe I should stop it and restart it, and then I'll know I'm not getting the whole thing in time lapse. So let me start to put this together so you can see what I'm doing, and when I edit it, I'll just edit out all the sewing and stuff in between. So I'm envisioning this as a section. And the first thing I want to do is, let me get these two together. I've also, you'll notice I've got a dark melon over on the side. the vertical one, and the horizontal one here is a lighter melon color. And I want that to be a pretty narrow seam. There's a shorter piece I can save on fabric. So here again, I don't know if you could see this on camera, but if this lighter fabric, it's darker than the white, but I can still see the shadowing through. So again, when I line this up to stitch it up here, I'm going to leave just a little bit of an overhang of the melon color. And I've gotten to where I just go ahead and pin it. I'm usually not much of a pinner, but these pieces are so small and they move around so easily. So I go ahead and pin that once I've gotten it straight there. And then when I sew, I'm going to use this edge of the melon as my guide for the 1/4 inch. And I'm going to trim it before I press it. It gives me a last minute chance to, sorry, this is probably pretty low for you, but just trimming the melon piece here. Try not to cut the piece behind it. And then I'm going to finger press it just so I'm less likely to get iron happy instead of pressing it. So I finger press